Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome back to the Leadership Studio. We have a great guest tonight, a good buddy of mine, Frazier Wilson, who's over at Shell. He's a great I want to say entrepreneur, but you're like not an entrepreneur.
Right.
He's a great guy in terms of corporate giving. And so we're going to learn a little bit about the corporate side. What does it mean from the Shell perspective to be giving to the community, to be part of the nonprofit community? And Shell and Frazier is one of the great guys to be talking to about this. I want to thank you guys for the many tweets that you've already sent in. We'll get to those in a little bit. But Frazier, thanks so much for being here on our program today.
I appreciate the invite.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
So this is a great class because the students are tweeting in questions as we speak, but they're also learning about fundraising. It's a master's program. Start out with a little bit about development. If you were writing a book, Frazier, on fundraising and development, and from the corporate side for you, what are some of the sort of key chapters that you would talk about?
Okay. First thing is shared value. Typically when we receive proposals or have conversations, it's usually one-sided. So make sure you understand what's the value of participating in that from the corporate side and also from the social/community side of the house. The other piece is being able to articulate, so what's the impact or the desired outcomes from this investment? Are you clear on that? How can you measure that? And we've always hear questions about it's hard to measure these things, but you can communicate what the impact is around that.
Go on.
Go ahead. And one of the third things about that is make sure you've done your homework on the company. Understand what's important to them, what's been their level of engagement in the past, and what are some of the initiatives that they support, just to make sure you're aligned and you're approaching the right organization with the type of requests that you're looking at.
And that's very similar to that shared value, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's all about that. And it's even more important on the corporate side, right? I mean, when you're doing corporate giving, different than foundations. Foundations may have sort of a wider range.
Wide philanthropy.
But there's sort of a self-interest for corporations in many ways, isn't there?
Well, it's really about being focused because, again, from a corporation, our giving, it's not about philanthropy. It's really about trying to address community needs as well as meet business objectives. So how can you do the two together? So that's what you look for in your corporate giving. So it looks for win-win opportunities because, again, if you want to give, we would do it through the foundation and just make it just a charitable gift with no expectations. But again, we want to address community as well as business in all our giving activity.
Now let's talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into some of the things that Shell sponsors. But where did you grow up, Frazier?
Well, originally from Mississippi, but I grew up in Illinois outside Chicago in Aurora. Moved back to Mississippi to go to college, went to Jackson State University. And there,
one of the finer universities in the country.
One of the great institutions in the country. From there, got recruited by Shell. I have an undergraduate in accounting. Came to Shell as an accountant, left, went into education, got certified as a special ed teacher, taught in Galena Park ISD. Then came back to Shell to start a youth academy. And from there, just started getting more involved in our outreach efforts, developing strategy, and now managing the foundation and our corporate giving activity.
And since I've known you, you've really grown a lot in Shell. I mean, has that been something that you planned on, or is it just happenstance, or what is all that about?
Well, I don't think anything is happenstance, but it wasn't planned. But really, it's taking advantage of the opportunities and learning from each of those environments. For example, when I started in accounting, I realized in undergrad I didn't want to stay in accounting, but I realized there was value in understanding how to analyze, understanding P&Ls, and be able to communicate that in a business environment. So I got an opportunity to move into the education sphere, which was my interest. And from that training and really getting in the trenches in special ed, working with the teachers, working with different organizations, working on inclusion and all these different activities gave me an opportunity to really get grounded and create some credibility and a network in this space. So those opportunities allowed me really to get into what I really enjoyed, business and education. So Shell provided the perfect opportunity for that when I came back to start the Youth Academy, then got involved in other outreach opportunities, and then just continued to expand and grow as you learn how can you create value with business and education working together. So that's really been my interest, and the opportunities have really presented themselves for me to do that.
And you went, how long ago was it when you entered into the social investment realm of Shell?
So I've been in this role for the past 4 years. So my previous activity was around workforce development. So creating a plan to ensure that there was a technical pool of talent to meet our workforce needs. So that was for about 6 or 7 years. So that got me involved in one aspect of social investment, which is the education piece of it.
Yeah. And what are some of the key things that Shell likes to give? Obviously, education.
Right.
You do a lot in the environment. What are some of the things?
Yeah, so 3 key focus areas: community, education, and environment. And again, we look for those things where our employees have a skill set and a strength and interest, where we can parlay that and partner with community organizations in that sphere. I mean, there are thousands and millions of great opportunities, but you can't do all of those things. So you got to hone in on where your employees have some strength and where you have some operational capacity as an organization.
And when you look at those 3 areas, is it evenly divided?
It's close. So we're a little bit more on the environmental side, then followed by education, then community. Yeah.
And is community, when we go to an arts event, maybe we see sponsored by Shell, or you go to the museum and sponsored by Shell, is that all part of community?
That's part of community, but we try to have a interdependent relationship among our focus areas. So most of our art engagement includes an element of education around math and science. What outreach are you doing in underserved communities? And also just to raise awareness about some of the things that we do and what the community could do to impact the environment positively.
When you look around town and when you look around the country, because you're here, Shell USA, you're funding things all over the country.
Correct.
When you look at the scope of everyone that you're funding, are there a few programs that you're maybe particularly proud of that you see that you've really had a dramatic impact?
Yeah, so there are several that we've been involved with from the start when they first started. GeoForce is a program with the University of Texas. Their primary focus was reaching out to underserved communities and rural communities to raise awareness about careers in the energy sector. That program has really grown. Another is our partnership with Children at Risk, which you're aware of. Some of the seminars that we've been supporting just to really raise awareness around key stakeholders about different policy issues that can influence health for children, just the quality of education, those small things we don't consider that really impact the greater good and health of the community. Another large one that we're supporting is the Smithsonian has a program, an I3 grant, tailored around how do you engage the community, business, and education in science reform. So that's been one we've been proud of for the past few years.
A couple of years ago, we worked together on sort of creating metrics.
Yes.
Right, to sort of so that nonprofits could actually measure their impact for Shell's purposes. And you brought in everyone you fund from all over the country, and some did not have problems coming up with metrics, but others really had problems. But you guys really look for outcomes, and we see that across the board. There are a lot of foundations, a lot of corporate people that are giving that really want to see some metrics. Talk about sort of that expectation when you fund someone.
Right, and really when you get funding from a corporation, the corporation has to report what's the value add, how does this impact the community, how does this impact the business. Previously, I mean, in the past 10 to 15 years, most corporations didn't have that expectation from their partners. They gave out of the goodness of their heart and also just to be good corporate citizens. But as opportunities and available dollars started to shrink, you had to have another screen to start looking at the opportunities that are presented to you. So output measurement, that was really the first step. That was the introduction to it. We knew that was not the end game, but what most corporations were receiving previously, we couldn't take our nonprofit partners from no metrics automatically to impact assessments. So outputs was the first stage to get them to at least start counting and looking at the things that they're doing to see if they can quantify it. So the next stage is moving to the point of outcomes and impacts. So what really was the outcome of you making this investment? And what's the impact that it's making on the community and in the business? So that's the driver. So what we're really trying to do, most organizations, you engage and you have a niche because you're trying to address a problem. So what problem are you trying to address? Can you quantify that? And what's the end goal? So if you're engaged, what are you looking
Yeah.
for the real impact of that investment?
Can you give us an example of maybe how you saw a particular nonprofit change in terms of how they did their metrics?
Yeah, definitely. So again, being in this space, and I'm an accountant by training, so of course I'm in the process and reviewing. So I just did a review of Shell's past giving history for about a 5 to 10 year block. What I noticed was I didn't get a lot of real data that I could utilize. So one organization that really stood up and stepped out for us was the National Fish and Wildlife Federation. So it's an organization we have been supporting for about 15 to 20 years, doing environmental projects across the country to help with restoration activities, things of that nature. So when we started having this conversation, we wanted to know more about what's the impact, what's the value add. What we ended up with was great. They showed us how they were able to leverage our investment to receive state and federal dollars to really impact more areas, and then they became more focused with their activities. So they identified some things we weren't looking at as potential risks to our operations that they could address through the investments that we were making, through the interest of some of the other state and federal agencies that were matching. I mean, that was a huge aha moment, and we definitely see that value in pushing forward.
I remember leading a group of all the environmental people that Shell funds, and I started off by saying, what sort of metrics are you using? Because we're going to need to sort of figure out some good metrics for each of you. And the first place was, I think it was Texas A&M at Corpus Christi. They do a big beach
the Hart
project.
Institute.
Yeah, and his first reaction was, well, we do this all the time. It shouldn't be a problem. And then each one of the environmental groups went, and he came up with that and says, I see why it's a problem. No one else knows what metrics are.
Right.
And I think it's amazing in the nonprofit world that we might say, well, environmental groups might have good metrics, but across the board, nonprofits aren't using necessarily metrics to show their impact on the community.
Right.
And it's one of the things that can be changed because of pressure from funders.
Right, exactly. And then measuring apples to apples, because again, just because you're in the same focus area doesn't mean that you're looking at the same things and you're assessing them the same way. Even from a funding perspective, we might view what you're doing differently. So again, having that conversation and agreeing on what we're looking at and what's an acceptable metric or outcome. So having that conversation is critical to your reporting activity.
When you first meet an executive director of a nonprofit organization, and maybe you've heard that they might be a good potential fit for you guys, what are the things that you're looking for from that nonprofit or from that executive director that makes you think, yeah, I'd like to figure out a partnership here. This might work. What are some of the things that come across for you?
So first thing, kick the wheels. So look at their financials. See that they have a successful management team. Look at the tenure. Look at their partners, other corporate sponsors, what type of projects they've supported. So I do my background work and reach out to those individuals, see what has been their experience working with the team. And then I look at their website and the proposal that they submit. Is it focused? Did they clearly identify what the problem that they're trying to address? Can they document that this really is a problem? What have been the strategies that they're looking at, and make sure all those things align and the KPI. So quick cursory view, and then we go out and we do a site visit, have an opportunity to see it for ourselves and talk to some of the participants who've gone through the program. So we actually do a thorough check before we just make a contribution to our organization.
And I would say on your behalf too, that part of the reason you're doing that is because you're not usually one-time givers. I mean, usually when you develop a partnership, this is something you're going to keep probably trying to give to them. If they're doing the right things, you're going to try every year to make sure that they're doing the right things and that they're truly helping out the community.
Right, exactly. So we look for alignment with what our focus area is for those activities. Again, as our business strategy change, so do our partners. Our partners will have to change. So we adjust our portfolio accordingly. But you typically look for those best-of-class partners who can deliver for you and minimize the scope creep. So.
And how much contact do you expect once you've given a grant to someone, say a first-year grant of $5,000 or $10,000, during the year before the next funding cycle, how much do you expect them to be in contact with you, and how much communication do you like to see?
So definitely the periodic update. So expectation from me, written communication at least 3 to 4 times, face-to-face meetings 2 to 3 times. So there's someone on the team who you'll be assigned to work with. So let's make sure you give those updates, not just during the time of funding. At that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
Because you've missed the opportunity to share the impact of the program. Because if you come during the time of the proposal, it's a sales pitch at that time.
Yeah.
And it's important to develop that relationship and look for those opportunities to create some collaboration with some of the other efforts that we're engaged in. So that early engagement is important, and learn how to do it without being a pain in the butt. So again, when you get that initial grant request, don't continue to come with multiple grant requests during the year. Come with a menu when you first have a conversation, so then the organization will have in the top of their head, in the back of their head, you can also do these things, even though we engage you and supported this effort. So just think more big picture when you engage.
And I like the reinforcement of the idea of letting people know how things are going, sort of ongoing communication. Because I do think one of the mistakes that nonprofits sometimes make is they'll ask Shell for money, and then the next time you hear from them is the next year when they're asking you for renewal of that money.
Exactly.
And you really do, you want a relationship.
Right.
You want to be buddies in a sense, right?
Right, and relationships are key in this environment, because again, even though a lot of it's not based on liking you, but a likability factor does have a lot to do. Do I want to work with you over the course of the year? So you need to spend that time to develop that relationship.
Yeah.
And also understand the ethic principles around that. So don't try to gift us and all those types, because I get invited to so many things and gifts and things of that nature. We can't accept those things. So again, just knowing how to manage that relationship effectively.
Yeah, and I often think that sometimes nonprofits forget that it's to your benefit to meet on a regular basis, because you like giving feedback.
Yes.
And you have great staff members who are happy to meet. I mean, maybe you're not available all the time, but you have a wonderful staff. So
right. Yeah, that engagement and feedback is important, because you won't get the real, authentic feedback unless we've developed a relationship where I feel you can handle that. So again, you want that relationship so you can have that open dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. You have served on the board of Children at Risk. You're on a number of boards. How often is it a good idea to attract people from, so if I want funding from Shell or from another corporate person, how often is it a good idea to have someone from that corporation on the board?
Well, it really depends on the nature of that corporation and their board structure for supporting leaders in that space. At Shell, one of the things, we want our leaders engaged in opportunities that really relate to their areas of interest and their expertise. Now, a lot participate because they really like the mission of that organization. Sometimes that can be to the detriment of that organization, because it could be undue influence. So now you have a bias that's associated with it, because most of the decision making we try to make without those influences and biases, because we report, was this contribution influenced by another individual? We report that information on all our grants.
Wow.
So the public might not know it, but internally we do look at those things.
Yeah. And if you have a little organization that's been trying to get funding, and you fund a lot of small organizations,
Yes.
And they have let's say, an accountant who's been there at 5 years at Shell, sort of an entry-level accountant who's on their board.
Right.
How does that impact? If that accountant maybe is also calling every couple of weeks and saying, "Can we get funding?"
It doesn't help, because that becomes a nuisance. Because again, you got to understand the number of requests that come through on a regular basis. I'm looking at over 3,000 requests a month. So to have that little tedious call does not help the case.
Yeah.
So
Now take away the call. Just having an employee from Shell on your board, does that make a difference?
Yes and no. If that employee is actively engaged, it can show where they're adding value. That is a positive sign. But just being a participant and participating on a committee might not sell it as much. But again, we give employees other options to contribute. We have an employees matching gift program.
Yeah.
So the employees can have their personal contribution matched with that organization. So that's another way of supporting the organization.
And I want to stand this for just another minute. A lot of times we see at the corporate level that maybe that entry-level accountant can have a little bit of an impact, but the big impact seems to be sort of more senior people, VPs and C-level employees, the chief operating officer, the general counsel. They tend to have a little bit more pull.
Right.
I mean, understandably, I guess.
Of course, because they have more influence on budgets, things of that nature. But that group's typically difficult to get some time because, again, they have a responsibility to generate profits for the corporation. So sometimes it's a challenge getting that dedicated time that you need to have an impact with the organization. Because we engage with those leaders and we ask the question, how engaged are you with this organization? And if we can't sense or they can't show where they really are contributing to the success and being able to hold them accountable for the impacts generated, we just have a different view and we negotiate what's the appropriate position that Shell needs to take with that organization. So we have that conversation with those executives in that space. And they understand what our focus areas are and what we're trying to achieve for our business. So it typically aligns well.
What do you like best about your job, Frazier?
The variety. And so
you do have a lot of variety, don't you?
I do. I mean, we can start today, start with a global call on how do you communicate and make decisions around funding in this type of environment. Meeting with sports teams on how do you engage in community activities. Talking to universities. I'll be leaving here talking to a collegiate group about how do you plan for success. Working with a global reporting organization on corporate philanthropy, putting in surveys, things of that nature. So working with tax group, working with environmental groups, how do you impact some of the major things that are happening in the Gulf Coast? So, and that's just today. So again, the variety, it's never a dull moment. So I enjoy it from that standpoint, but it makes you stay on your toes. So you have to stay abreast of what's happening in so many different functions and aspects of the business, and also understanding the players and their intricacies and how can you influence and share information in a way that's going to be positively received so you can move the agenda and get their goals accomplished.
And knowing you, variety is real. There really is variety. I mean, I think of people that you fund, and you know, Johnny from Jackson, Mississippi, who runs Ducks Unlimited. He's like a good old boy from Mississippi.
Right.
Yet he has a relationship with you because he has an environmental group. And
exactly.
You've had your days where you go to Alaska to do things. You know, I mean, you're like you're really variety, aren't you?
Right. Right. So I enjoy that because my portfolio is primarily national in scope, but I'm also responsible for the local activity in Houston. So I enjoy the variety that it provides me.
What is the division between your overall giving Houston versus the nation? Because you do a lot of Houston stuff.
We do a lot in Houston. So about 4 years ago when I moved into the role, we were heavily funded in Houston and the Texas market. So as we looked at what our strategy is as a corporation, we're a national organization, so we need to reflect that in our giving. So we moved to have more balance in our portfolio. So if we look at Gulf Coast to the rest of the country, we're probably 65% Gulf Coast with the balance over the rest of the country.
Wow. And Shell is an international organization.
Correct.
Your home headquarters is in Amsterdam. Is it Amsterdam or
The Hague?
The Hague. Yeah, we've talked about this. Right. The Hague in the Netherlands.
Right.
And how does that have an impact? I mean, do you think that you guys are a different organization because your home base is in The Hague as opposed to Exxon, which has their home base in Texas?
Yeah, we do operate a little different, even though we have primarily some of the same focus areas. How we view and implement those things will be different because having the global influence that we have, how they view social investment is a little different because, again, they're involved in a lot of sustainable development activities. And here, the government doesn't engage in a lot of those activities. So there's an expectation that corporations are partnering with the community to deliver some of the value and address some of those community needs.
Wow. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see nonprofits make when they're coming to you for money or when they're engaged as a partner? We've talked about a few of them already, but are there a couple that sort of like, I wish they just wouldn't do this?
Really, it's lack of focus. That's a dead giveaway. Trying to be all things, you can't effectively deliver on all the things that you're looking for. Scope creep.
Yeah.
Not diversifying their funding portfolio. So we're looking for the sustainability of the organization. So if most of your fundings come from one or two organizations. How stable are you? And really just the pressure tactic. That the pressure doesn't work when you're trying to solicit funds. Understand when to engage and when to step away from an organization.
I want to get to some questions from the class, but one last question. When you look around town, and this is similar to a previous question, but when you look at high-performing organizations in regards to fundraising, and I've asked everyone who sat in this chair to talk about who are some of the really great performers, who comes across to you as like, these people know how to fundraise?
Well, so some of the clear things that I see is focus and being able to share what the value is for the community and company. Second, a strong management team who understands fundraising is about developing relationships and networking. Third is managing the costs, operational costs. And the last thing is ensuring the entire organization gets it up and down the spectrum. So if I look at some of those that stand out in that space, the Nature Conservancy does a great job in this space.
They have a great development director, right? Cecilia?
Cecilia.
Yeah.
Another group that does a great job, KIP does a great job in this space as well, as far as expanding and developing their relationship. Also, United Way is very successful in this space. Yeah.
So those are all good places.
Yeah.
And Nature Conservancy is a good example because it's not really very big in terms of staff, but they have tremendous impact, don't they?
Exactly.
Yeah, very nice. So a couple questions from the group here. Richard Kendall has a question about employee giving. How has that worked? How is that managed at Shell? How do you get employees to give, and do they get any choices around where they give?
All right, so Shell has a open giving campaign where employees can give to any 501c3. It's a year-round effort. It's available online, or they can submit a paper form. So identify the organization they want to make a contribution to, send it in. It's processed by our vendor organization. That organization receives a contribution during that quarter. So it's pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Marta Alvarenga wanted to know about the Shell Center for Sustainability. Did you guys actually create that, or did someone come up with that idea and then you decided to fund it and name it?
So it was a partnership with Rice, just brainstorming on really engaging around sustainability. So it's so important that we felt it was necessary to have a center where we can just really put literature and information out into the stratosphere about the value and how this can impact the community positively. So, I mean, we've getting some great feedback from that effort. We're continuing to look at how can we revamp it and increase the influence that the organization is having across the globe.
When a place calls themselves the Shell Center for Sustainability, does that mean that they're going to get bigger grants from Shell?
Well, it usually was a large cash investment to get it started. So it really depends on how it's structured. It can be structured as an endowment or an annual cash infusion. It really depends on how that initial gift was structured with that organization.
It's interesting because so many times there are things that are named and people no longer get money from those places, right?
Exactly.
I was visiting a school this week and they had the Hertzstein Gymnasium.
Right.
And they said, well, we really need a roof, and Hertzstein isn't giving us money. But I think for someone new to the nonprofit world, they think, well, if it's called the Hertzstein Gym, why isn't the Hertzstein Foundation helping you?
Right,
So.
and that's one of the things as a nonprofit you need to be cognizant of. So when you do the branding opportunities, realize you'll limit the number of organizations who might consider giving you funding. So since you have the Shell Center for Sustainability, do you really think one of our competitors is going to make a significant investment into that center, even though it benefits them as well? So
don't ask Exxon for money for the Shell Center for Sustainability.
So the competitors need to look at that. So some of the ways I advise NGOs in this space: consider your funding sources. Is it better that you have the Center for Sustainability supported by Shell or sponsored by Shell instead of having Shell as the named organization? So just be creative and think long term. I mean, because the appeal of that large initial gift, it can make you lose sight of what might happen 10 or 15 years down the road when your predecessor comes in.
I remember when I was at Rice, we had a big Texaco program. I don't think that exists anymore.
Nah, that's gone.
The Texaco Leadership Program. Amy Cole Guzman wants to know about STEM education investments, science and math.
Right.
How are you able to measure the impact of those STEM education investments?
Okay. So that's a long-term investment.
That's a big deal for you guys,
yeah,
too.
that's a huge one. That's where I spent 6 to 7 years working on with Shell. So again, with that, our expectations that we're creating a larger pool of technical talent. So it's a multi-pronged approach. How do you engage students? How do you engage teachers? How do you engage industry in this space? So our model is, again, to work primarily with teachers, because teachers are the linchpin between most of that. So work on the professional development in this space and improve their instructional techniques and make sure they're engaging and measuring the impact and sharing the opportunities in energy. So the things we're doing with the students, supporting internships, scholarships, but in the lower grades, hands-on competitions like math counts, C-STEM, Future City, things of that nature, to really get the kids engaged to apply the math and science skills. Because at the early stage, we're not trying to get them to choose a career. We just want them to have sound math and science skills, because as they matriculate, then they'll get to the point where they start making decisions about where they want to work and who's been supporting. So hopefully they'll start seeing that Shell Pectin as a group that helped support them along the way. And as you partner with your universities and other trade organizations, again, being open about what our goal is. At the end of the day, we're all looking for full-time employees.
Right.
But what can we do to ensure that there's an available pool to meet all our needs, so it's not competitive in the earlier stage of the funnel, but at the back end, that's when you get engaged. So it is strategic on how you engage. You just have to be open with the design process to ensure that everyone feels included in what you're doing.
And working with a lot of energy companies in Houston and around the country, we see that there's a lot of active engagement in trying to do STEM education, science and math education. But one of the unique things about Shell, though, is that I think you guys may be the only sort of significant presence in making sure that children growing up in high poverty families with diverse backgrounds, that they also look at STEM education. Is that something that was a conscious decision on the part of Shell to say, hey, let's make sure that we get some Latino and African American kids who are growing up, single parent households or growing up in poverty, that they also get this access? Has that been a big deal for you guys?
Yeah, definitely it's been part of it, because again, you want your workforce to reflect the communities in which you live and operate. Additionally, as we started looking at the challenges that we were faced with, the size of the pool coming out of the community colleges and the four-year institutions, the largest untapped pool were minorities and women.
Yeah.
So if you continue to focus all your efforts on white males in this space, you're going to end up with the same result. So go to the largest available pool. It just made sense to go to the larger pool. You have a better chance of meeting your goals if you do that.
The world doesn't always make sense, though, right? It's just sort of an odd little thing. So. But it's sort of interesting. 71% of the students in HISD are Latino students, and if we're not encouraging them to do STEM careers, it's sort of ridiculous. Isn't it?
Exactly, especially in Houston, where you have so many industries dependent on technical mindsets and abilities. So it just doesn't make sense not to invest in science and math and encourage students in that space.
Well, I applaud Shell for doing that, and I know on your dime, I'm going to Washington, D.C., I think in a couple of weeks to talk about this very this very thing. So Nicole Amaya has a question about, and this is an interesting question. If Shell is going to give to a nonprofit, is it a conflict of interest if you're a board member? And so that's a very interesting question, I think.
Well, it's a conflict of interest if you're involved in the decision making.
Yeah.
So in those, because I participate on several boards, I recuse myself from the decision making team. In fact, I actually send that decision to another group. So it's removed from my team, just so I won't have any undue influence on that. So again, that's part of the ethics around making those decisions. That's why I sometimes caution nonprofits about having Shell leaders or Shell employees on the board if they're trying to influence the decision. So we can have a conversation, but they shouldn't be a part of the proposal or coming in on your pitch.
Yeah. Monica Sines has a good question. How do you develop new relationships with new nonprofits, community partners? Do you target specific types of organizations, larger or smaller? Or how do they get to you? How do you find out about those places, Frazier?
So really it's the current group of partners, just being involved in different conferences, participating in events and activities, and just referrals. I mean, we're open to the conversation. And again, it's part of understanding how to cultivate relationship. Most of the time, it's just getting together for a coffee just to get to know you.
Yeah.
And understand that's not the time to ask, can you give me funding for my organization? Look for ways to get on their mailing list. Look for ways to be invited to sit at a table with the individual. So again, so you can cultivate the relationship. It takes time. It takes 6 months or more to really get to that stage. And many want to rush because I understand their boards might have pressure on them, or they might have some funding challenges or budget constraints that they're trying to meet. But you must take time to develop those relationships. That is so key in that space.
It's a long period of time.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah. So Kristen Maher has a question. Kristen, great to hear from you. Great question about the Shell Open. And how does that play into your giving? And you guys are the sponsors,
Right.
obviously, the Shell Open.
Right.
So talk about that a little bit.
All right, so the Shell Open is one of the largest charity organizations on the PGA Tour. So the charity dollars that's raised from that organization, they stay in the Houston market. 7 charities benefit from that effort. And again, what we try to do with our large events is tie it to an outreach or a charity component. So when you see us engage in different activities, so what we try to do, when we used to be the sponsor for City of Houston July 4th fireworks, part of our agreement for engaging in that is that you had to do a food drive as well for us to participate. So again, when we support these large efforts, we look for a way to ensure that it benefits the community. Of course, it helps us, the Shell Open, huge presence on the network, so it helps your brand recognition, but you also want to ensure that you help the community as well.
And have there always been 7 charities? I think in the past there's been it was just 1 or 2. Has it sort of grown over the years?
Oh, it's still the original 7 charities.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, who are some of those?
So Chickapin
School, yeah.
So that's definitely one of them. So just really had the opportunity to meet a young man from Chickapin this weekend, Rashawn King.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
He's at Harvard, isn't he?
He's at Harvard now. I mean, amazing story. He's there studying business, social entrepreneurship, and statistics. So again,
and he's a character, I think.
He's a good character.
Yeah.
You won't be bored sitting there with him.
I love those students.
Right.
Yeah.
That Boys and Girls Club, things of that nature. So again, you look for those organizations where you can really get connected and your employees feel good about volunteering and participating in those activities.
Denise Small wants to know about your role in sort of creating a strategic plan. So the foundation and Shell Giving sort of strategic plan. How do you go about doing that?
So again, community assessment, internal assessment about what the needs are for the corporation. Additionally, the skill set and interests of the employees, and then looking at our global strategy. So that process typically involves various business leaders, various function leaders, and then the practitioners in this space. And we really look at what we identify as non-technical risks, those things that can impact our business but are not directly tied to our business, as well as what communities do we really feel that we can impact. So when you get all that data and synthesize it, look at our past success in supporting some of the organizations, some of the future opportunities, that's how you shape your strategy, and you test it. You test it with different groups. We test it with our nonprofits. We do focus group activities. We test it internally with our employee networks. We test it with our leadership team, just to ensure it's fit for purpose, and we move forward with it.
Wow. Talk to me real briefly, Frazier, about some of your smaller grants or groups that you've grown with. And I'll pick as example CSTEM, which is a great group that focuses on a lot of things that both of us are really excited about. When you started funding CSTEM, how much did you give them maybe in their first year about?
First year, CSTEM probably received $5,000. I mean, it was a pilot grant. It was a new organization, small team. I mean, novel concept, but again, we needed a track record of success, and we needed to see the organization grow. I mean, they did a great job of really leveraging the investment. We didn't anticipate that they would be able to impact as many students and teachers as they were able to do, and from that, we were able to increase our funding in support of the organization. Now, CSTEM partners with our Shell Eco Marathon, one of our large efforts to bring students and work on in concept cars on different ways to utilize fuel, and CSTEM is one of the partners with that because they bring a K through 12 audience to the event, have them involved in robotics, the arts, GPS, a whole lot of things that are important to developing that technical skill set. So it created a great partnership.
And their grant is it significantly larger than it used to be?
Oh yeah,
it is.
It's definitely larger.
It's nice. And then tell me about sort of on the very large side for you, the National Audubon Society. I mean, what are some of the large organizations? About how much are they getting from Shell?
So significant organizations in investment, National Fish and Wildlife is one of our largest
So
partners.
how much do you give them about?
So that is six figures.
Okay.
Well, it's a little bit more. So it's a significant investment.
So you could you have investments as large as $1 million?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But these are big national organizations that, again, showing a significant impact.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very good. Felicia Garrett has a very interesting question. When you meet, whether it's from National Fish and Wildlife or from CSTEM, what does sort of the perfect development team look like to you?
Perfect development team from those organizations coming to approach Shell for dollars?
Yeah, that you see day in and day out.
Well, knowledgeable program managers, strong communications team, and you need an inspired leader who's comfortable allowing the others to lead and move forward. So I typically look for those three things.
Yeah. And you don't really get to see the in-depth of the development team. I mean, generally you're seeing an executive director,
correct,
president, maybe the director of development, maybe
correct,
one other person usually is sort of
correct. And I think one of the mistakes nonprofits make is bringing in their executives instead of those that are more knowledgeable about their program efforts. So again, bring in the one who can answer the questions and the details that we might engage in. I mean, it's nice to bring in one of your influential board members, but again, just manage how you handle that.
Well, I think about some of the teams from Children at Risk, Diana Zarzuelo and Caroline Holcomb. These are staff members who you developed great relationships with, right? And,
exactly.
And that helped deepen the overall relationship.
Right, exactly. I mean, they were very knowledgeable, and they can manage the communication aspect and share the impact and the results.
Yeah.
And that's what you're looking for.
Absolutely. Kristen Morrow has another question. What are the criteria, and we've talked a little bit about this, but when you choose a charity, a brand new charity, you've kicked the wheels a little bit. Anything else around that in terms of the criteria for choosing to give them a gift?
And for a new charity, I mean, it's really a pilot, but the other thing, most corporations, they have a limited budget for their outreach activities. So if they already have an existing portfolio with other organizations in there typically isn't a lot of dollars for new opportunities. So the NGO must understand your proposal has to be strong enough to get those undecided dollars or to have dollars reallocated from the current portfolio to support your effort. So again, we received, thousands of proposals, great looking proposals, but it's a duplication of effort, and it doesn't give us a significant difference from what we're already doing with another organization.
So you like a real uniqueness. You
Yes.
like something that no one else is doing that's going to set you apart, that sets them apart.
Yes, definitely. Being able to address a particular special public or a different demographic or geographic region, and the ability to be replicated. Because again, I look for opportunities where I can support the other Shell operations in different locations, where we have a partner, where we can move that program there, or they can find an existing partner who can replicate that effort.
And that's an interesting point that we've touched on a little bit in this class. but maybe not enough, is this whole idea that you can apply for a grant from a foundation or from a corporation, but it's hard when you're brand new to be able to say, well, we do what they do, we just do it a little bit better.
Right.
That doesn't usually work. I mean,
Right.
people want to see something sort of new, right?
Right.
Not just a mix of the same thing.
Right, and even if you're doing the same thing and you do it a little bit better, part of it is continuing to share that opportunity. We have several organizations, they've tried for several years. Eventually, they applied at the right time and continued that dialogue where they were considered and they received a pilot grant. So again, be consistent in developing your relationship, because again, it takes time to develop that relationship to get to the point where you're considered, where there's some additional dollars available, or you're making a change in who your partner is on a particular focus area or issue.
I remember many years ago, I'm meeting finally someone from El Paso Energy, which is no longer around, and I met the woman who was in charge of giving funds. She says, "Oh, Bob Sanborn, for 4 years I've been receiving letters from you asking for money. I'm finally going to do." And it was sort of, to me, it was interesting that she remembered that she was getting those proposals and she liked them year in, year out, and finally she was able to figure out a way to do it. So
definitely, we have record retention. So we look at all the proposals. We keep a history. So we have over a 20-year history. We'll know what proposals you've sent in on what particular topics, what the dollar value is. So we look to see for consistency, see have you responded to the feedbacks. Again, all that's important. So
yeah, very good. Denise Ball wants to know about your own professional accomplishments and personal accomplishments. What are you most proud of in your career? It's like an interview question.
I know.
I love those.
I would probably say some of that strategy work I've been able to engage in with Shell, the workforce strategy that I worked on. Geez, man, it's been that long, 10 years ago. And then this most recently, just the changes that we've made to the foundation, our overall corporate giving. I mean, it feels good to see that it's sustainable and it's been adopted across the enterprise. So it's some good work that you can feel good about.
You have a couple of kids.
Yes.
And the work that you're doing, in some ways, is extraordinary. You go home to your kids feeling like you've done some good things.
Oh yeah, I mean, it makes it easy. I mean, because it's always a challenge being away from the kids. Again, I constantly struggle with that, so I try to manage my schedule accordingly, my travel schedule, my evening engagements. But to be able to have the conversation with my kids about some of the things that I'm doing, and when we're going out across the city and people will come up to me and thank you for this, and share with my kids some of the things that we've been able to do as a corporation to help the community. I mean, it makes you feel proud, and your kids feel proud as well.
They do.
I mean, I remember one night my son came to an event with me, and it was late, so we're leaving the event about 9:30, 10 o'clock. He's falling asleep in the back of the car, and he shared, "Dad, I want to do what you do." He said, "I know I'm gonna have to travel a lot. Well, less travel, but I like what you do. I want to be able to do what you do." So it's good to see that he recognizes that.
Yeah, that's a really nice thing.
Yeah.
Raquel Ramos wants to know, and this probably comes up from time to time, the idea of an oil company investing in sustainability. Do people say, "Hey, what's that all about? Are you just trying to cover up your tracks? What's going on?"
Right. So we've heard that, and again, is part of being responsible corporate citizens. So as an energy company, it's important that you help, again, address some of those community needs and sustainability around this. I mean, there are very smart people working at energy companies. So tapping into their knowledge base and their skill set to help address some of the problems that are faced in that local market, it just makes sense to engage them in that space. And also being able to leverage, I mean, some of the available resources that they can bring to the table and the influences to help with that. So again, it's just responsible corporate citizenship to do those things. And it's a responsible business to do that as well, because you want healthy communities, because you strive because you have a robust, healthy community. So you must support the efforts that create economic development opportunities in that community, to ensure that you have a quality education system, make sure that the health that's accessible to the employees in that space. Looking at the infrastructure of that community, make sure that's sound. Make sure you have the arts to attract and retain some of that community. Make sure that appropriate policies to support that community as well. So again, we all have an interest and a responsibility in that space. So energy companies are no different than anyone else. We all should be actively engaged in that space.
And Shell hasn't had, and maybe I'm not remembering, but it seems like a lot of our major oil companies have had disasters that they've had to sort of, has there been a big Shell disaster in recent history that I'm just not remembering?
Well, everyone has had their share of incidents.
I'm sure the last thing Shell would want is for you to remind me.
To keep us busy. So again, with our safety culture, again, those things are few and far in between. Again, you always have a human element engaged, but Shell prides itself on safety. I mean, we have dedicated days where we just recognize what we're doing in safety. That's part of our scorecard, safety, looking at incidents and looking at injuries and things of that nature. And so that's very important in the company.
Well, I think around that safety, I go to meetings at Shell and you're pointed out where the emergency exits, where the gathering points.
You must go through the safety protocol, and we have 12 life-saving rules that we live by. So again, if you violate one of those rules, you're subject to termination. So we're serious about those things. So.
And it's even at home, right?
Yes,
I mean,
even
like
at home.
You cannot call on your cell phone in the car.
Cannot use my phone.
Even though you're off the clock.
No texting, the speeding, climbing above a certain level without being harnessed in, making sure you document where you're traveling, where you store chemicals, things of that nature. There's a whole lot of things around that. Again, our expectations when you come to work that you make it back home to your family.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very interesting. Sharonda has a question about employee giving. Is there any pressure in employee giving? I mean, what happens when they say, no, I don't want to do any employee giving?
No pressure at all. So again, it's your choice.
Do you get like a jeans day or something if you're an employee giver? Or?
Certain departments do things of that nature, but again, it's anonymous. So again, from an administrative standpoint, you validate that they are an employee, that the contribution was legit. But other than that, it's anonymous giving. We have our campaign during the fall semester just to kick off that it's available, but it's open year round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ashol, who is one of our students from the South Sudan,
Okay.
She wants to know about your education background. I mean, you're Dr. Wilson, right?
Right.
And how does that education background for you? I know it helps in your commitment to public education, but how has it impacted your work right now at Shell?
Well, I think it's been valuable. Again, my undergrad is in accounting and my doctorate's in educational leadership. Being able to speak knowledgeably about both subjects and be credible in that space. So again, one of the challenges that I see externally, we typically don't go to the experts to make decisions on particular areas, especially some of the legislation we see around education.
Yeah.
So again, being able to help bridge that gap and really communicate in a language that both parties understand is really been a plus, and it's helped me in my career and definitely Shell in that space.
Yeah, very good. So final couple questions tonight. You have a favorite restaurant in Houston, Frazier?
It's a favorite restaurant my wife and I like to go to. It's Roxport, but my favorite restaurant is America's.
America's,
I love America's.
How many times have I met you at America's for lunch? I mean, it's a great place,
Yeah,
isn't it?
excellent place.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite sort of secret place in Houston that maybe not a lot of people know of that you really like?
Not gonna tell you. It wouldn't be a secret if I told you. I like to go in peace.
But you do have a favorite secret little place?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. And when they make the Frazier Wilson movie in Hollywood, who's the best actor to play you, do you think? I have an idea, but who do you think?
Well, hopefully my son, since he said he wants to go in the theater. I don't know. I've been preaching math and science, and he's telling me theater, so we're going to work on that.
Yeah, I'm still saying Denzel. So.
But they say that
that,
about every black guy. They say that. I'm not going to take that one.
No, Dr. Frazier Wilson, thank you so much, Frazier, for doing this. The class appreciates it. I so appreciate it. Thank you for everything you do here.
Thanks again, Bob. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We will see you guys next time here at the Leadership Studio.